You wouldn't say something as troublesome as inheriting now after being out of touch for 23 years, would you?
The woman who claimed to be my father's remarriage partner was very assertive. She insisted that the inheritance of my deceased father, whom she had taken care of until the end, belonged to her. Of course, I had no objections. I didn't want a single yen of the inheritance from my father who had abandoned me, his daughter.
Hurry up and sign that paper. Abandon the inheritance officially.
At that moment, my grandfather stopped me from signing as prompted. His eyes were burning with intense anger as he stared at my father's remarriage partner. My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old. Since graduating from university, I've been working as an administrative assistant at an insurance agency. I'm in my late 20s, unmarried, and have no boyfriend. It's not that I don't want to get married, but I just can't bring myself to date men. The reason is simple: I have a distrust of men. The cause lies with my father. My father David disappeared 23 years ago after leaving me with my grandfather. The reason was probably my mother's death. My mother died in a traffic accident when I was 5 years old and my father was 35 years old. According to my grandfather, my father was so depressed that he couldn't hear the voices around him. Perhaps he lost confidence in living together, so he left me with his parents and disappeared.
Sarah did nothing wrong. Poor thing. You can rely on your grandparents.
I still can't forget the sad expression on my grandfather's face at that time. However, strangely enough, I can't remember what kind of face my father left me with. I think I wanted to forget the existence of my father who abandoned me as soon as possible. It was about 5 years after that when I heard a rumor that my father had remarried. The estrangement between me and my father lasted for 23 years. The only thing I truly believed in was the love of my grandparents and deceased mother. To be honest, I hated my father from the bottom of my heart. The fact that I was a child abandoned by his parents tormented me deeply. It was especially painful when I was in elementary and junior high school because there were only families with both parents around me. I have been teased or harassed for not having parents many times. There were times when I got into a big fight with someone and my grandparents were called out.
You were teased for not having parents? That's their fault. Sorry, Sarah. You're the only one who has a hard time. Grandpa and Grandma are always on your side.
Even such kind grandparents have been angry with me before. It was because I was much worse at controlling my emotions than now. I still can't forget the self-hatred at that time. Because I felt pathetic and regretted being abandoned, I hated my father even more. There are countless unpleasant things that children do when they don't have parents. Among them, it is particularly easy to understand the feeling of alienation felt on Father's Day or Mother's Day. As part of recreation, there were times when we drew portraits of our parents. There were also classmates who prepared presents happily on their parents' birthdays or wedding anniversaries. At such times, kind classmates left me alone. That kindness made me feel even more painful, but who should I complain to? Gradually, I became more isolated. What was fortunate for me without parents was that the grandparents who took me in were relatively wealthy. My grandfather is a former lawyer and is still relied upon by people in the area even now that he is old. My grandmother is always kind and good at cooking, and she treated me, who had no cuteness, very carefully.
You don't have to worry about money. You can do any hobby you want, and if you ever want to go to college, Grandpa and Grandma will help you properly.
Instead of directly venting anger at my father, I had all the love of my grandparents as much as I wanted. I wanted anything I wanted and sometimes said something outrageous. A rational grandfather didn't spoil me like that.
Grandpa can only buy what you need for Sarah. If you just want something, you can't buy it for you. It's not because Grandpa is stingy that he says this kind of thing. It's because Grandpa doesn't want Sarah to become an adult who spends money recklessly.
Grandfather is really a solid person. He is really kind, but not always so. He could be very strict at times and wouldn't forgive me for being spoiled. I often felt lonely when I went out with my grandparents. On holidays, when we went shopping at commercial facilities, there were family members everywhere you looked. Children who listened to their whimsical requests. Siblings who get along well by obediently listening to each other's words. Parents and children who enjoy the same game at the game center. Couples who look happily at their healthy children. Even though I had grandparents, there were no parents around me. Commercial facilities were places that confronted me with such reality. Why only me? There were many times when I felt such thoughts. There are many people in the world who live under worse conditions than mine. Although it was understood in my head, there was no way to fill the loneliness or pain unique to myself alone. My grandparents understood well the unbearable pain that I had. One day, my grandfather made me such a proposal.
If Sarah really wants to, she can use the foster care system. You can live with a couple of the same age as your real parents as a family. However,
my grandfather cut off his words and shed tears. It was the first time I had seen my grandfather cry.
Grandpa and Grandma really care about Sarah and love her very much. If you say you're in pain, you have to withdraw. Honestly, even talking about this is painful. But if it's for you.
My grandfather couldn't speak until the end. Rather, I didn't let him speak. I'm not going to leave Grandpa and Grandma behind, am I? Don't ever talk about adoption again. My home is here. This place where Grandpa and Grandma are is my place. If I just kept grieving, my grandparents would feel sad too. The time has come for me to face myself firmly. I thought so strongly. I accepted myself as a child abandoned by my parents and still lived positively. Thanks to the abundant love of my grandparents, I had become strong before I knew it. The passing of my grandmother due to illness was 20 years after my father abandoned me. It had been a long time since I had to say goodbye to someone so close. I was extremely sad, but my grandfather was calm and collected. He even had the composure to comfort me. I felt puzzled that my grandfather, who should have been the one grieving the most, was so composed.
I was prepared for this day to come someday. We talked a lot while we were still alive and were ready to say goodbye. That's why I'm surprised at how well I'm holding up. It's strange.
My grandparents' parting was very peaceful. Everyone in the family praised their parting as something they would want for themselves, and I was proud too. While my grandmother was being cremated, one of my aunts approached me with an apologetic look on her face.
I'm sorry to bring this up at a time like this,
she said, and showing me a picture of a man and asking if I would consider marriage. She knew it would be frowned upon, but she brought it up anyway. She looked genuinely sorry about it. Surprisingly, my grandfather smiled when he heard about it.
That's great news. You should definitely consider it. Think of your aunt's feelings.
My grandfather said that, but I couldn't feel the same way. Because of the painful experience of being abandoned by my father, I had become distrustful of men. While I admired the kind of relationship my grandparents had, I couldn't bring myself to hope for marriage. In my heart, such an intractable dilemma had taken shape. 3 years after my grandmother's passing, my grandfather approached me with a serious look on his face and said he had something to tell me.
David seems to have passed away in the hospital.
It was then that I learned for the first time that my father had been seriously ill. In fact, my grandfather had been in touch with him through his lawyer friends in recent years. The news of his death also came from those lawyer friends.
I heard that the funeral is the day after tomorrow. I'm going to go. What about you, Sarah?
After thinking about it, I decided not to attend the funeral. I didn't ask for any details like the address. My grandfather said he would leave it up to me. My father and I had cut ties 23 years ago. I don't have any hatred left for him now, but I don't feel like mourning him either. The next day, my grandfather took the train to visit his deceased son. I, who was left behind, reflected on the fact that I had no parents. There was no point in blaming my mother who had passed away in an accident. On the other hand, I still feel dissatisfied with my father's decision to leave me with my grandparents and cut off contact. It's just so pathetic for a person to leave their child's upbringing to their parents and cut off contact. I don't know what he was thinking, but couldn't he have done something else? A few years later, he remarried another woman. I can hardly understand it. But then again, I think to myself that there are fathers out there who are worse than mine. Fathers who are abusive, addicted to gambling or alcohol, antisocial, criminals. Compared to such monstrous fathers, maybe my father wasn't so bad after all. After all, for these past 23 years, he has never caused me any direct trouble. From the fact that he secretly communicated with my grandfather through a third party without telling me, it is clear that my father actively and thoroughly avoided any communication with me. He erased his own existence so as not to trouble my heart. Maybe that was his way of showing sincerity towards me. When I was 5 years old, I felt that my father was an awkward and unsociable person even though I was just a child. Until the very end, my father was just as I had imagined him back then. I now regret that I never heard his thoughts from his own mouth. After my father's funeral, a woman I didn't know visited me. She was probably in her 40s and had a very strong personality with distinctive heavy makeup.
You're Sarah, right? I knew it right away. You look a lot like David.
I had an intuition that she was my father's new wife. The woman named Taylor handed me some documents.
I came here today to ask you to renounce your inheritance, Sarah.
According to Taylor, my father had about 20 million yen in savings. If things continue as they were, Taylor and I would split the savings in half. She said that was unacceptable.
Don't you think so? I took care of David until the end, so it's only natural that I should get his money.
She said it was ridiculous for someone who hadn't been in touch for years to suddenly claim their rights. Yes, I understand, I replied. But if you don't mind, could you tell me what kind of life my father led?
What kind of life? It was a boring everyday life. He didn't drink or smoke. He didn't play pachinko, slots, or horse racing. He either read books all day or sat in front of his computer writing articles.
My father worked as a writer and would write anything if asked to do so: internet news, SEO articles, novels, scenarios. Even when he became bedridden due to illness in his later years, he continued writing. I was struck by an unexpected feeling. A self-centered father was suited for a lazy life like that. Although I had thought so somewhere in my heart, I couldn't imagine my father as a stoic writer. At the same time, I was beginning to lose sight of who my father really was. It wasn't an easy feat to accumulate 20 million yen through writing work alone. It wasn't an ordinary effort. Why did someone who could be so devoted to something abandon his duty to raise his daughter?
Come on, isn't it enough? Sign it quickly. What's wrong? You haven't been in touch for 23 years, and now you're saying you want to inherit it?
Of course, I was going to abandon the inheritance. I don't want anything that someone who abandoned his daughter left behind.
What are you doing? Sign that paper quickly. Officially abandon the inheritance.
As I was prompted to sign, my grandfather came and stopped me. My grandfather, who faced Taylor head-on, looked angry no matter how you looked at him.
How dare you come all the way here so easily? I told you not to come.
Father-in-law. Don't be so cold, W. I'm your daughter-in-law, you know?
I don't remember recognizing you. And you like David's money more than David himself, don't you?
So that's not true. It's just like I said at the funeral.
The grudge between my grandfather and Taylor. I had no idea what it was. My grandfather explained it to me as I was bewildered.
It's true that David remarried Taylor. David regretted it. Taylor is promiscuous, spends a lot of money, and hardly takes care of her sick husband.
So that's why it's a lie. Who said such a thing? The lawyer? Hey, Sarah, just sign it already. Abandon the inheritance.
That's impossible. David's will says he will leave all his property to his daughter Sarah.
Will.
I was as surprised as Taylor. It was the first time I heard about my father's will. My grandfather nodded deeply as he looked into my eyes.
Don't worry. The will has not been opened yet. It has to be verified by the court. The reason Grandpa knows the contents of the will is because David read the letter attached to the will.
Father's letter.
Yes. It's written in that letter. He decided to leave all his property to Sarah. And your infidelity is also written there. There are also photos of evidence. David doesn't want to leave anything to you.
Taylor slumped down in disappointment. The words, "There are also photos of evidence," may have had an effect on her. She seemed to have given up because she could no longer escape. I was still confused. Leaving property to a daughter who was supposed to have been abandoned? For what purpose? My grandfather smiled sadly as he sensed my confusion.
I'm sorry for keeping silent for so long, Sarah. Your father didn't hate you and abandon you. He had no choice but to leave you with Grandpa and Grandma because of his illness.
Actually, my father had the same illness as my grandmother when he was young. After his wife died in an accident, he seriously thought about it. If he continued to raise his daughter like this, he would eventually become a big burden for her. And that day could come at any time. His daughter might become a so-called young carer. Rather than letting that happen, it would be better to be hated for life and cut off the relationship completely. It was an extremely extreme choice, typical of a clumsy and unsociable father. Knowing everything, I felt indescribable. I was actually loved by my father.
Taylor, are you obsessed with inheritance because you want to use David's legacy to pay off your debts? Unfortunately, you won't get a penny.
This is the worst.
You must be disappointed. You approached David for money from the beginning, didn't you?
Taylor let out a big sigh. It seems that she hit the nail on the head. She hung her head and went home with a heavy heart. It was the moment when Taylor's debt repayment life, which would continue for many years to come, was confirmed. After Taylor left, my grandfather apologized to me again.
I'm sorry I kept it a secret. I couldn't tell you because of my promise to David.
My grandfather seemed relieved. Only he was feeling refreshed. I was still feeling confused. After all, my father's negative evaluation has been going on for 23 years. It can't be changed easily. It will probably take time. For now, I wanted to read the letter my grandfather mentioned. That's where the story begins. If I'm satisfied with everything, I'll inherit the inheritance for the first time. And then I'll go to my father's grave right away. I'll probably tell my father how grateful I am for the first time. I was looking forward to that moment. Building a home is a significant event in one's life. Please listen to the story of my marital relationship that collapsed immediately after reaching the pinnacle of happiness. I'm Kate. I'm 30 years old. My family consists of my husband Tony, who will be 35 years old, and our 3-year-old daughter Mia. We are going to build our long-awaited dream house. When I say this, people often respond with, "You must be living a perfect and happy life." Well, that's not the case for me. Lately, I've been constantly worried about our house under construction and my in-laws. The first step towards the collapse was when I left my daughter with my in-laws. My husband and I both work, so we hardly have any time on weekdays. We would usually go out on weekends to look at properties and discuss house designs. Since my daughter would get bored and fussy along the way, I would always leave her with my parents who live nearby. However, one morning, my father fell ill and had to go to the hospital. I received a message saying that they couldn't take care of Mia. It couldn't be helped, so I decided to cancel our plans for the day. That's what I thought, but my husband suggested.
What if we ask my parents to take care of her?
To be honest, I don't get along well with my in-laws. They believe that as the son's wife, I don't need to hold back and can say whatever I want. What era are we in? Besides, I feel hesitant about suddenly asking them to take care of a 3-year-old. But if we postpone today's plans, the completion of our house would be delayed. I struggled with the decision, but I had no choice for today, so I decided to entrust my daughter to my in-laws. As soon as I finished my errands that day, I went straight to my in-laws' house with an expensive box of sweets as a gift. In the evening, we arrived at my in-laws' house, and perhaps thanks to the gift, they responded cheerfully. After politely thanking my in-laws, we started heading home when my daughter said,
"Where is Grandpa and Grandma's room in the new house?"
I was taken aback and asked Mia, "What are you talking about? Did Grandpa and Grandma ask you that?"
"I don't know."
With that, she ended the conversation and started talking to her stuffed penguin. Mia calls my parents a mom's grandpa and a mom's grandma. Grandpa and a grandma refer to no one other than my in-laws. I see. Grandpa and Grandma must have been wondering if there is a room for them when they come to our house. At that time, I'm sure that's what I thought. Since then, my in-laws have started visiting us frequently, targeting the times when my husband and I are at home, such as weekday evenings and holidays. Our family is currently living in a small and old rental apartment to save money for buying a house. Whenever my in-laws come to our house, they immediately settle down in the dining area or on the sofa and ask to see the documents related to our house under construction. Even before I can stop them, my husband eagerly presents the documents and starts explaining to my in-laws. Why do they need to see them? It's already uncomfortable enough that they come over so often. After that, my mother-in-law bombards me with a series of questions, as if she were in a parliamentary debate. I'm the one who has to answer the questions, not my husband. It's as if the chairperson is speaking through her.
Regarding this floor plan, don't you think the kitchen's location here is inconvenient? Please change it. Since there are few small rooms, add more. Everyone feels comfortable in small rooms as they get older. Besides, having only one children's room won't be enough when you have another child. What are your thoughts on the declining birth rate?
I'm sorry. The last sentence was a lie. It's not like they're questioning me about measures to counter the declining birth rate. This time, it seems to be my turn to answer. Based on discussions between my husband and me, following proper procedures, and having meetings with the contractor, the foundation work has already begun. It's no longer possible to change the layout, so please understand. I responded somewhat angrily. Then, they started asking me in great detail about the furniture and appliances. My mother-in-law claims to be a professional when it comes to houses.
I have many friends, and I visited various homes and carefully observed different rooms. With my discerning eye, I can immediately tell which rooms are comfortable and which furniture has good taste. This house, this room, is completely unacceptable. It will drive away good fortune, and even work won't go well. It's the worst.
She claims to be a professional, but she's just a blood-sucking bug. My mother-in-law is so annoying that I jokingly said, in that case, should we make it a 2-family house and split the cost? But my in-laws got furious. My father-in-law.
Are you telling us to give you money? You ungrateful child.
A 2-family house? I hate anything that feels so formal and lonely.
That day, my in-laws left early. Go home, go home. You're not even real parents. There's no need to be told to be filial. They're more like a what? That night, after putting our daughter to bed, my husband approached me with an irritated expression.
My parents are just trying to give us advice out of goodwill, so don't be so cold.
Cold? That's not my intention. Besides, aren't your parents the ones being much more disrespectful? They keep meddling in our house matters and always try to one-up us. They treat me like a fool just because I'm the daughter-in-law.
They're our parents, so it's only natural. You're being incredibly rude to their well-intentioned advice. You're such an insensitive woman. Seriously. Calm down and reflect.
After that, my husband turned away and refused to speak. Well, they are your parents, no doubt about that. But we have our own separate family. Besides, we haven't received any financial assistance from your parents. It's rude to keep giving unsolicited opinions without contributing financially. My husband told me to calm down, but instead of cooling off, I became even more angry at his unreasonable choice of words. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. After all the ups and downs, our house was finally completed. Our family moved in with excitement and began living in our new home.
Starting today, my parents will be living with us. We can use the larger room upstairs for my father and the smaller one for my mother. It shouldn't be a problem, right?
Hold on a second. Why are you suddenly saying such things? Didn't we decide to use one of the rooms upstairs as Mia's room? I never agreed to live with your parents. Besides, your father and mother might not like that room, considering how they usually are.
They won't say anything. They've already seen the rooms, so don't worry.
Your parents saw the rooms? When?
I think it was the day before we went for the house viewing.
Wait a minute. Let me confirm. Your parents came to see this house the day before we went for the viewing?
Yes. They said they wanted to see it, so I gave them the key I was holding. It's not a big deal, they just wanted to take a look. It doesn't cost anything.
Husband seemed annoyed as if the conversation was over and went back to working on the TV wiring that was left unfinished. It does cost something, and it just decreased. And quite dramatically. I didn't want to see my husband's face, so I left the kitchen unpacking as it was and went upstairs. I closed the door, locked it, and tried to organize my thoughts that were in disarray due to confusion and anger. I truly felt relieved that Mia was at the nursery school because it allowed me to think alone. Thanks to that, I can think clearly and calmly. I don't want to be with those people anymore, not even for a second. However, we had just made a big purchase of a house. I need to be calm and composed. I need to think about what to say and what not to say. I need to think about our future, mine and Mia's. I stayed in the room, contemplating and keeping these thoughts in mind while waiting for my in-laws to arrive. As my husband said, my in-laws arrived in the early afternoon along with a truck carrying their belongings.
You should at least greet us. You guys have no common sense.
Oh, it's still a mess here. You're so clumsy.
After complaining for a while, my in-laws naturally entered our newly built house. I was listening attentively from the second floor, so I came out of the room and headed towards the entrance. Father-in-law, mother-in-law, I never heard anything about living together with you. My first words, spoken with determination, were surprisingly cold. Father-in-law seemed annoyed by that and quickly blamed me.
I told Tony. There shouldn't be any problem.
No, there is a problem. I heard from Tony this morning that you and mother-in-law have the intention to live together. Besides, I have no intention of living with you. Not with such rude people.
What did you say? Tony said it was fine.
That's right. You're such an impudent daughter-in-law. If you don't like it, why don't you leave, Kate?
No, it's not going to work. I've been thinking this for a long time, but our ways of thinking are too different to have a conversation with these people. As I was thinking about how to fight back, my husband came flying over in a panic.
What are you doing, Kate? Don't fight with my parents.
Fight? It's not an equal fight. I'm being verbally abused unilaterally just because I'm a wife. And now, I'm being blamed by my husband again. I think again that this parent and child are the same. Tony, I can't live with your parents.
You can't. Don't make things difficult for me. You're my wife, so you should obey your husband, right?
Before I am your wife, I am a human being. Do you think you can force me to obey you, my father-in-law, who had been listening to our conversation?
I don't want a wife like that.
Then my husband also agreed with his father, saying,
That's right. Maybe it's better to divorce a wife who can't treat my parents well.
I've been waiting for this. Understood. Then let's get a divorce. I said it clearly. A husband who brought up the idea of divorce, and a wife who agreed to it. I hope my smartphone in my pocket is recording this exchange well. With a feeling of prayer, I continued on. We will become strangers, so please return the 35 million yen that Tony lent us as the construction cost of this house. Parents-in-law, huh? My parents-in-law raised their voices in surprise. My husband lost his color and looked at me with a face that was white beyond blue. I will explain very politely to my parents-in-law, who do not know the circumstances. It seems that there is some misunderstanding. Tony did not contribute a single yen to the purchase cost of the house. This house was built only with my savings. Because this person had no savings at all due to a complete lack of planning. Since my husband and I both work, we shared the same amount of living expenses from each other's income. We had a promise to save the remaining amount in each other's name, but this person wasted it and didn't put it into savings.
Hey, Kate. You don't have to go that far.
It's all true. And yet, when it came to buying a house, you wouldn't give in to having the house in my name, would you? So I made it so that I would lend you money. There's a loan agreement, so you can't pretend it didn't happen.
That's...
I left my husband and parents-in-law, who were dumbfounded, where they were, and quickly packed my valuables, clothes, my daughter's favorite toys and clothes into a suitcase and a Boston bag. Holding my daughter's favorite penguin under my arm, I loaded them into my compact car and quickly drove off. I said goodbye to the newly built house that I had a short relationship with. After that, I picked up my daughter from the nursery and headed to my parents' house. My parents were quite surprised when I suddenly appeared with a large amount of luggage while they were in their jerseys. If it's sudden and inconvenient, I can go to a business hotel or something, I said hesitantly, and my parents hurriedly stopped me. I heard later that my parents were worried that I might be thinking of taking my daughter with me. In fact, it was the opposite. I had made a vow to protect this child no matter what. For the time being, I explained the situation to my parents. That I was going to divorce my husband, who had no good points, and that I absolutely wanted to take care of my daughter. My parents promised to support me wholeheartedly. And they told me to live at their house for a while. This was a very grateful offer for me. As I worked that evening, I summarized everything that had happened between my husband and my parents-in-law in a document. I saved the audio data from the conversations I had with my husband and my parents-in-law, which I had recorded on my smartphone, to my computer and external media. Armed with these, I took paid leave and used my weekends to visit several law firms. Finally, I found a lawyer who seemed trustworthy and formally requested their assistance. As I continued with my busy daily life, a week had passed in the blink of an eye since I left our new home. On that day, when I finished work and left the office, someone was waiting for me. It was my husband. I would like to call him my ex-husband, but since the divorce papers had not been processed yet, he was still my husband on the family register, which was unfortunate. Although we hadn't had any conversations, I was afraid of what might happen if he got angry and did something. So, I looked for a place where there were people around and entered a cafe with him. I made sure to turn on the recording function on my smartphone, just in case. I tried to stay as calm as possible and asked him, "Do you have something to say?"
Yes, that's right. About the house, I want to give it to you, Kate. I want to change the ownership. Can you just forget about the money?
I replied, I'm sorry, but I can't bring myself to live in that house anymore. Your parents stepped inside before us, didn't they?
Those little details don't matter.
They matter to me. It's impossible. After taking a sip of coffee, I looked closely at my ex-husband. His hair was messy, with strands sticking out in several places. He had stubble on his chin, and his complexion wasn't good either. Although he was wearing a suit, his white shirt was wrinkled, and it seemed like he hadn't ironed it or taken it to the cleaners. I didn't know what kind of life he was living, but I thought he looked quite worn out.
Please, Kate. I can't easily repay such a large sum of money.
You knew it was a large sum of money when you borrowed it, didn't you? I suggested that we put the house in both our names, and I even proposed that it could be in my name alone. But you refused to let go of the idea that it should be your house, your name.
That's because I thought I was the head of the household. And even though I mentioned divorce, I wasn't serious. Why did you take it seriously?
I'm serious. I'm fed up, and I'm definitely getting a divorce. If it were just a lack of ambition, it would be one thing, but I can't imagine being stuck with such rude parents.
That's...
Mia is waiting for me, so if we're done talking, I'm going home.
Wait. I'll be the one to take care of Mia.
I felt uneasy at my ex-husband's words. When I returned home, I asked my parents to be careful not to let Mia be taken away by force. A few days after my ex-husband's visit, I received a call from the nursery saying that someone who appeared to be my parents-in-law had come. I left work early and hurried to the nursery. Fortunately, I had informed them in advance, so my parents-in-law were waiting for me in a separate room. They had made sure that Mia wouldn't meet them. When I entered the room where my parents-in-law were, I was suddenly shouted at.
Give back our grandchild. You greedy thief.
What do you mean by greedy thief? I haven't stolen anything.
If you're not a thief, then you're a fraud. You must have done something wicked to earn that money. Otherwise, there's no way you could have that much money at your age.
No, all the money I lent to Tony is mine. It's the money I earned fairly and squarely, my own money, money I received from my parents, and money I received as a gift from my grandmother while she was still alive.
Huh? A gift?
Yes. Every year, they transferred an amount that was not subject to gift tax to an account in my name. The total amount, the money I received from selling stocks in my name, and the savings I had accumulated, all added up to that amount.
It really was Kate's money.
Didn't you give Tony a gift while you were alive? You can still do it now.
Gur.
My father-in-law groaned and fell silent. My parents-in-law are flashy and love to show off, and they love luxury more than anything else. They're an ordinary salaried family, so they probably don't have much savings and no passive income. It's clear that they never even thought of giving a gift while they were alive. I'm sorry, but I'm divorcing Tony. I'll take care of Mia myself. Please don't come to the nursery anymore, because it's a nuisance. I said that much and quickly took Mia and went back to my parents' house. My advice was in vain, and Tony and my parents-in-law came several times after that. Each time, I tried to talk to them as calmly as possible and send them away, but I was often grabbed by the arm or showered with abusive language. I recorded all of their behavior on my smartphone. About a month had passed since the day I left our new home. I sent a document through a lawyer requesting repayment of the debt and agreement on the divorce. My ex-husband agreed to most of it, but he showed a fighting spirit regarding custody. However, when I mentioned that I would claim compensation if we fought, he backed down. He had become quite docile. After all, I had plenty of evidence, and he had no savings to pay. It took a little longer than I expected for my ex-husband to repay the debt. This was because the sale of the new house did not go as smoothly as I had hoped. At first, I thought that Tony and my parents-in-law would live in the new house together. The reason was simple. Neither my parents-in-law nor my husband could afford to pay the 35 million yen purchase price. My husband didn't have any savings to begin with, and even if they sold the old house where my parents-in-law lived, it wouldn't be enough to cover the cost. In the end, we put the new house up for sale at a lower price than the purchase price, and after several price reductions, we finally found a buyer. The difference between the purchase price and the sale price, as well as the commission at the time of sale, were borrowed by my husband from the bank. My husband, who had lost his house and was burdened with debt, ended up living with my parents-in-law in their shabby house. Furthermore, my ex-husband's sister, who had divorced, returned with her 2 sons. The sons were in junior high school and high school. Perhaps because 6 adults were crowded into a small, dilapidated house, the sound of them verbally abusing each other echoed every day, and it became a topic of conversation in the neighborhood. This family no longer had anything to do with us. Since they couldn't even pay child support, there was no need to have any contact with them. 4 years have passed since then, and my daughter Mia is now in the 2nd grade of elementary school. The 2 of us are currently renting a room near my parents' house. On days when I come home late from work, my parents take care of Mia for me, and with their help, the 2 of us spend our days happily. I had thought that it would be nice to continue living with just the 2 of us without getting married again, but now I have someone I'm dating. He is a 36-year-old man with a 1st-grade daughter and a history of divorce. We often see each other when we drop off and pick up our children at the nursery, and we started talking, which led to a confession. Recently, the 4 of us have been going out together with our daughters. The other day, Mia casually said,
If we build a house, it would be nice if we all had our own rooms, and it would be great if we could have a dog.
My heart skipped a beat when I heard those words. Actually, a little while ago, I received a proposal from that man. I'm waiting for an answer because of my daughters, but my mind is made up. I approached Mia and hugged her small back. I said, "That's right. I want to build a house again. This time, let's discuss it as a family and make a house where everyone can be happy."